Welcome to the Purpose Chasers podcast, where adversity meets ambition and setbacks become setups for something greater. I'm your host, Mark Crandall. After walking away from a $5.1 million construction sale, enduring loss, betrayal, a season of darkness, and a pile of financial devastation, I came back to the one thing I can't shake, helping people live on purpose. This podcast isn't about chasing dollars, it's about chasing calling. Every week, we shine light on creators, entrepreneurs, and artists who refuse to quit. People who kept moving forward when life told them to sit down. If you've ever been knocked down, counted out, or told no, you're in the right place. Because here, we turn pain into power and purpose into impact. Let's dive into this week's episode. Purpose Chasers, welcome back to this episode. I'm very, very excited as I have a guest who's one of my favorite humans to follow online, Damon Burton, the founder of SEO Nation, the author of a really, there's too much value in a free book. He's the author of Outrank. You can get access to that for free. Damon, I want to dive into this episode by asking you the question of how you came to the purpose of chasing agency ownership for what, based off of my brief research, appears to be 18 some years now.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, 18 years. So I didn't set out originally. I more found my passion in it as, entrepreneurship involved. And so there's lots of different tangents we could take. So I'll try and give the abbreviated version and then we can go wherever from there. I grew up lower middle class. My parents divorced when I was two. My mom married an alcoholic as my stepdad and grew up with chaos through my childhood. And so for me, it was like, how do I not do that? And so I didn't have like a positive lighthouse. I just had like a negative lighthouse to go, okay, avoid that. And so that's when it became pretty early on. And a lot of it I didn't realize until in retrospect, but it was like, okay, well, my goal originally was not to be financially successful. It was just to not be broke. And so then how do you do that? Okay, how do you not have financial instability? Well, you have a baseline of financial stability. And so it started with just like small things like that. And then I never knew what I would, I didn't have a specific goal as far as a career or anything. I had a reasonable amount of confidence that I would figure something out and do it on my own. But, until I actually started the agency, I had no idea. And even when I started the agency, I didn't know this would be the thing that I'd be doing for so long. But I think that's probably a valuable lesson is, especially earlier entrepreneurs, is to give yourself the freedom to not know. Because I think a lot of us get too committed to going like, well, I see other people winning, or I see these shiny objects, or I see this like trend in this bandwagon, let's go jump on that. And then it may or may not be what you're passionate about, but then your ego gets in your head where you're like, well, I've committed and so I'm just going to stick it out. And you end up just doing something that you really personally don't like. You just think you like because you see other people say they like it. And so just giving myself the flexibility to not know and to make mistakes. And then once I started to see agency life was, promising, and I liked where it was heading as I got, more experienced with it. It probably wasn't until I was like 2 years into it where I went, you know what, I think this is actually what I like, and I think I'm going to stick to it and take it from there.
What do you believe in your early lessons kept you on path to staying committed to 18 years of owning an agency to getting to the level of clientele that you have, which is it's pretty jaw-dropping, which we'll get into that in a little bit. Is it consistency that kept you there, or was it your initial like not wanting to be broke, as you said?
No, I mean, in the beginning it was fun and it still is fun. So, I chose SEO for a variety of reasons. And a big part of that choice was elimination of other things. So it was a process of elimination. And so when I first started the agency, I was into landing page design. And so I worked for this guy who was really successful, but he was like a total pain in the butt and toxic and, drugs, and cheated on his wife and like everything other than being successful in entrepreneurship. Like I wanted nothing to do with it. But even on the entrepreneurship side, he would even do things that I didn't admire, but it just exposed me to what was possible. And so from there, I took what I liked and didn't like. A lot of times I talk about, your career entrepreneurship is like comparing it to dating. And so what I mean, like I'll call it like dating the phases. And so what I mean by that is like there's different phases of entrepreneurship, and just like there is different phases in a relationship. And so you might, date one person and they have things you like and don't like, and then the relationship ends and you move on to the next relationship and you carry with you the things that you like and don't like. And then the next relationship ideally gets incrementally better until you find the thing, the relationship you want to commit to. And so I think entrepreneurship is a lot like that, where in the beginning, I did landing page design and I built up reputation around that to doing very specific affiliate page designs, where it was enough that I could pay the bills. And so I could do, so actually, let me take a pause and don't let me forget to come back where I'm at. And because there's one thing that happened before this is the toxic guy I left because he was toxic. And when I left, I had built up a reputation for doing these designs where somebody called me and said, "Hey, we heard you left. I got this other guy that is looking for somebody who does exactly what you wanted that you do. He's on the other line right now. Do you want to take the call?" And so I ended up getting this job working remote for a company in Las Vegas. My wife and I, we've been together 21 years. And at this point, um, I he asked if I would move to Vegas, and we're new in the relationship, and I had a good inkling that she was probably going to be the one that I was going to marry, and I didn't want to move to Vegas because if I was building this relationship, I knew at some point we'd have kids, and I just didn't want to grow a family in Vegas, and so he says, well, we can revisit it. Why don't we just have you work remotely? So I took that as an opportunity to work on my side client or the day job in the morning because my wife worked at a hospital. So she'd get up at 4 a.m. So I was like, why don't I get up at 4 a.m.? And so I'd work like 4 to 8 a.m. on the 9 to 5 hour jobs and just crank it out. And I'd be done by the early morning. So then I had all day to work on whatever I wanted to. So that's when I started building up on the side. But then what had happened was that company, one day I was trying to get a hold of my contacts. This was before Slack, and so it was on AOL Instant Messenger, and I couldn't get a hold of anybody. And then I get a message back from another designer that says, "Hey, did you hear what happened?" And I said, "No, I can't get a hold of anybody." Well, come to find out, the company got raided by the ATF and the FTC and the sheriff's office, like movie scene, guns, everything, and got shut down. And so at that point, I had three choices, and it was like, well, wait to see if I still had a job. Two was go find a new job, or three was bet on myself and take my side clients and see where that went. And so at that point, I did the math, right? So I bet on myself, and the way that I made that decision was, okay, I'm going to lose 60% of my income because my day job was 60%. My side hustle was, 40%. And for context, that still wasn't a lot. Like my day job, I was making like 25 to 29,000 a year, something like that. And then on the side, I was making 20,000 a year. And so I was going to cut my income down to about $20,000 a year, but my wife had a job. And so my deciding factor was, could we still pay the bills? And so it's like, well, we can still pay mortgage, we can still pay car payment, we can still put food on the table. And what you have to think about as an entrepreneur is like you will never have more time. You'll always have less. And so I was considerate of, okay, at some point we're going to have kids. At some point, hopefully I have more clients. Like all these things is going to mean less time in the future. So that seemed as calculated as a risk as I could take. It was at that moment that seemed like a reasonable risk. So that's when I took the bet and bet on myself and started the agency. Now, back to your question about SEO, was for the first couple of months I did design, and then I had a friend that I did a traditional website for, and then I started helping them with paid ads, and then they said, "What do you know about Google?" And they were talking about organic, and I said, "Well, I think I know enough that I can help you, but not enough that I feel comfortable charging you for it." And so this is where I came up with what ended up landing my first client. And
And
then
that's right. And I just want to pause you. That's what you said to a client, because that's really unheard of for an agency owner to be saying to a client. So
yeah, well, it does a lot of things because what I did from that is I spoke honestly, which is established as trust. And then what I offered him is I said, I still want to get incentivized, but I'll take the risk. So how about I do it for free until we hit these goals? We mutually agree on the goals. And then if I hit those goals, then you owe me retroactively and we start a forward moving retainer. So I still have all the upside. I may not get it now. I'm going to get some of it retroactively and get a retainer if I hit those goals. But then the client, they're like, well, you know, Mark offered a nice gesture. We now trust him more. He's incentivized. We believe in him. And at the worst, it either works or we're out nothing. And so then we ended up hitting those goals within, I think, 3 months. And then through that process, I got more exposed to SEO. I knew the basics. I mean, nothing compared to what I know now, but I knew enough that I was like, I could take action. And then when we got results, I enjoyed that process. So that's really the answer to your question is I enjoyed it. And so then I took it to a second client that was a second design client that was referred from the first client. And I said, hey, client number two, here's what we just did for client number one, who you know. Do you want to do the same arrangement? And they said yes. And so had results with them. And then it was really after that where I said, I think this is the thing I want to do, or at least try to do, because I knew pretty much from the beginning I didn't want to be an agency that offered it all. And so I didn't want to get into design and paid ads, and social media wasn't so much a thing yet back then, but and SEO and email and this and that. And so I said, I'll continue to do design as requested, but I'm going to really move my intentions towards SEO and see where this goes. And then here we are 18 years later.
And you're still having fun?
Yeah, I actually, that's a great question because a couple years ago I asked myself that, and I was nervous to think through it because that could be a big reckoning if the answer was no, because then you would be aware of it and then it would change your perspective on everything. And so for a while I was hesitant to really think through that to answer it, and then I finally decided to. And yeah, I still have fun. All my responsibilities have greatly changed. My my enjoyment is still in the industry of SEO, but maybe less so in, copywriting. Like I don't like doing the copywriting anymore. I do still enjoy tinkering in the technical stuff, but that's not the best use of my time. And so now the responsibilities have greatly shifted, but my enjoyment as a whole is still within the industry.
That's interesting. The thread that I've throughout the couple questions that I've asked you has been based off of your happiness and whether or not you enjoy still doing it. And that it just I can't stop smiling. It brings me joy to know that somebody could be doing something out on their own for 18 plus years and still enjoying it. So social proof is something that I enjoy teaching and studying. It's something that I believe that you've become a shameless master at. And you do it in such a humble way that it never comes off braggadocious or egotistical, yet you're displaying, 5 and 6 figure contracts and the biggest names in the industry as clients that you're leading. Can you walk me through kind of the mindset to match the social proof display that you've gone through your career, which if you're not into looking on the internet, or if you look Damon up on Facebook, you'll see he has his top two clients right there on his profile, which are Tony Robbins and Russell Brunson. So can you talk me through, like I get uncomfortable just saying that on my podcast. You're doing their SEO and done remarkable things for them. What's the mindset internal level? How do you get to the level of like, yeah, dude, I do this and I do it well here?
Through reps, I guess. If I couldn't confidently do that 10 years ago. So it's probably come in waves. So we have two topics here. One is, how social proof, and then two is how do you get comfortable with it. So social proof is relative to the length of my career is kind of new. And so for the longest time I did not do social media or social proof. And probably it was really around 2020 when that started to change. So as of the time we're recording this, 5 years ago. And before that, I was only on Facebook, and I used that as kind of like a safe space where I would not really talk about marketing, and I would only talk about my wife and kids and personal stuff. And if people messaged me about business or SEO questions, I would just kind of ignore them because it was just like I needed like a quiet space. And so at one point, I realized that I didn't have an intention behind social media. And so I was good about filtering out and muting people and the drama. So it wasn't anything like that. I just realized one day it was unproductive. And so I decided to delete it. And most of us know that if you delete Facebook, it doesn't really go away. Like you could just log in the next day and everything's there. And so I was like, well, not me, Mr. Zuckerberg. So if I'm going to delete this, I'm going to really delete it. So I went through and deleted every post I'd ever made. And then I deleted every comment I'd ever made on any friend's wall. Then it started to take forever. So I asked my wife if she could help out. And so she went in and went through all my private messages, which is, I joke about, like, if you want to test the strength of your relationship, give your wife access to your DMs. And so she went through and deleted everything. And then after everything was deleted, then I unfriended everybody. Then I deleted it. So I really wiped everything out. And then what had happened was, a couple weeks later or whatever, I realized there was somebody that was like that got through that filter. They were a friend first in some capacity, and then they became a client. And now I didn't have a way to talk to him. And so I needed to reach out to him, but I didn't want to turn everything back on for just this one message. And so I sat on it for a while and went, how can I be intentional about this? And I decided, well, I'm going to start to be more intentional in what I put out there. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. Well, I like talking about my wife and kids. I'm gonna still do that. But if I also want to start a business audience, is that gonna repel that audience? Or if I start to talk about business and marketing, am I gonna confuse my friends and family? And I realized, both of those are me. So whatever, like we're just gonna do it and see where it goes. And so I think I went through a period of where, like, maybe the first 3 months I kind of tripped over myself and was trying to figure out where my boundaries are and what my voice was. And then at about 6 months was when I realized I was getting a couple deals out of it. And then 9 months is when I went, I should probably reverse engineer this and see where I'm really at. And I was somewhere around $150,000 in contracts from social media. And so then I went, oh, this is actually working. And so, let's figure out why. And so the short reason why social proof works is because people will follow you for your business expertise, but they'll convert when they relate to you as a human. And so that's where the two of those things comes in, where it's business and personal. And so, like, if you follow any of my stuff, like one day I'll be talking about technical stuff, and then the next day I'm like, my wife is hot, or like I just went on a trip with my kids. And
We're
there's
showing a
countless,
massive, sick beachfront property you're building.
yeah, or projects we're working on.
Yeah.
And so where it starts to really work is I just had, you're familiar with my course, and there's somebody in the group that had a one-on-one call yesterday, and they were asking about social proof, and they had, these things going on in their life, which we all have. And so they were really nervous and kind of put a pause on social media. One, because they didn't have the energy, which I can understand. But then two, they're like, I just don't, like, who wants to read that stuff? Everybody wants to read that stuff because online is now, whether it's, your version of your diary or soap opera or whatever, like it's a form of entertainment. It's a form of where people go to spend their time to relax in some capacity. And for the same reason that you and I met, you probably related to something at some point. And so when you put out personal content, it's what establishes a seed of trust and understanding and relatability, which then leads to relationships or business. And so once I was about that 9 months in and 150 grand, that's when I went, okay, this is largely I kept doing it because of the personal reward, because I would get messages of gratitude and I would get messages of people saying whatever I posted impacted their life. And people will take what you share and translate it into their own stories. And like a great example is I had this one guy send me a really long message, probably one of the longest ones I've ever had. And it was about how he has an eating disorder and I changed his life. I've never had an eating disorder and I've never talked about eating disorders, but whatever traumatic experience or troubling times that I talked about, he was able to go, Damon's a human, I'm a human, we're all humans. And so I'm not alone now. And so that's what happens where it establishes this trust factor. And then that's also where it converts to transactional relationships too. So that's kind of the evolution of it. And then through that, to your second question about, how do you feel comfortable about mentioning what you're doing and who you're doing it with, there's an element of, understanding the relationship. And also the reality is like, if you're good at what you do, like, you're good at what you do. And so I'm not ashamed of what I do. And the fact that I get to do it with cool people probably inspires other people. And so a lot of the posts I make are largely less for me and more the part that I get out of it is the personal reward. The transactional stuff is great. Like that's a bonus, but probably to your point why it comes off as, humble and not bragging is because I'm not putting the post out there to go look at my wins. I'm putting it out there to go look at what's possible. And so then when I put that out there, I'm not really creating content pieces to be provocative. I never have calls to action. I'm never like, jump on a call. Like I'm really documenting. And so when you switch your perspective from content creation to documentation, that's probably where that hurdle comes down of well, how do I be sensational? How do I be provocative? And then you also get that element of authenticity because you don't really have an agenda in your post. You're just going, here's what just happened, or here's what I'm doing.
I mean, I was not expecting such a phenomenal answer from you. I was expecting you to say something along the lines of like, well, when you're good, you're good, right? It's like when you're good, you tell everybody that you're good. And, do you believe that SEO is a long-term asset for business owners? And is that why you've stayed in as long as you have?
No, I mean, yes, it's a long-term asset, but the reason why I've stayed in it for as long as I have is to your point, it's fun. So when you asked me that question earlier about like, and I replied at one point I had a day where I asked myself that question. Really, what the answer as to why I enjoyed it was one, it's consistent enough that I know what I'm walking into each day, but two, it's evolving frequently enough to keep it exciting and changing, right? And so I think the human brain needs or thrives on those two components of predictability, but also, you know, change. And so SEO has that for me. As far as long-term asset, yeah, it's always been a long-term asset. So like every time there's like a new thing, like there's this, these jokes where it's like SEO dies every 30 days. Now it dies like every 3 minutes. Like it's just there's a constant trend of people poaching on the idea of SEO dying, but really what it is just marketers being marketers, and they're like, no, here's a new shiny thing. So it's not that the thing died. They're just like, look at my shiny thing. And so with SEO, one thing that I tend to not do is throw rocks at other forms of marketing. But what I will do is I'll speak transparently of the pros and cons, including SEO. And that's also what sets you up as an expert is when you can be honest and speak of the disadvantages of your own product. And so when we talk about SEO being a long-term thing, where most people fail to communicate, like we've probably all heard that SEO takes at least 12 months, but why? Most people don't explain why. And so we can maybe start there. Like the difference is progress
That's
versus,
a great starting point. I did not frame my question that well. I actually hit you with two questions, so that's a great starting point, Damon, if you could start there.
yeah. So it's like, why does SEO take a long time? Well, progress doesn't take a long time, but monetization does. And the difference between progress and monetization is, I could probably show you a website, depending on what we're starting with, if you have historical content, how competitive of an industry you're in, you might see progress in as little as 30 to 60 days. But what progress means is, let's say we benchmark where you're at and you're on page 10 of Google, and 30 days later you're on page 8. That's a huge jump. You jump 2 pages, which is 20 results, 20 competitors you just leaped over, but you're going to have zero monetization. And for the next quarter, you're going to go from page 8 to page 4. That's another astronomical jump, and you're still going to have $0 to show for it. And the reason why is because all the traffic is on page 1 of Google. Like 90% plus of the traffic is on page 1. So you have to have enough progress to get to the point of monetization. So that's why it takes time. But then the other part of your question is like, is it a long-term asset? Yes, because if we compare it to paid ads, the advantages of paid ads are that they're quicker, relatively speaking. Like you can have an ad on today, but that doesn't mean you get an ROI today. You probably still have to burn money for 30 to 90 days before you start to get the right avatar and get an ROI. So there's like people don't speak of the opposite, right? They're like ads are faster, SEO is slow. Yes, but from which perspective, right? It's faster to start burning money, but it may not necessarily be faster to get an ROI. They might be the same. And so with paid ads, the disadvantage is if you turn it off, everything is gone. You have no compounding residual benefit from the product and the efforts that you made. With SEO, you do. And so you technically still don't own the traffic, but if you stop, if you do SEO long enough that you're on page 1 and then you just stop, you don't just vanish like paid ads. It's a slow burn. Like you could probably stay on page one. You could probably stay in position number one for months, if not years, and on page one for definitely months and most likely several years as well. And so the reason why you keep doing SEO is for two reasons. One is because you want to keep your gap between your competitors and build a moat. But then two is once you get a monopoly on page one for your immediate priorities as targets, then you expand the reach. Maybe you start layering in other targets that are still monetizable. There was just others that were priorities. Or maybe you're a service-based industry and you start scaling and adding in different locations. And to the last point you mentioned roofing, we have a client that started with us, I'd guess 4 or 5 years ago. His goal was like $1 million. The dude's at $20 million now. He just casually throws it out. Like last year, I think he said he's at 10. And the year before he said he was at 8. And like the year before he was at 5. And it's just like it's a compounding, like look at it like your 401k or whatever. There's compounding interest the longer you put your efforts into SEO.
Yeah, and I found that with organic marketing across the board, whether that be social posting or creating content to put up natively on your own platforms, it seems to have a greater long-term payoff. Stephanie, who's a dear friend of mine, asked this question, and I'm uncomfortable asking you, but I want to ask, what do you have to believe about yourself to close a level of deal such as a Tony Robbins?
You have to have faith in your processes. Um,
Hmm.
I'll give you a good example of when I realized that is it was around year 8 of running this agency where I realized how big of a gap I had in my documentation. And the way that came about was I had a friend that he had built and sold 5 businesses in 10 years. He's since gone on to sell a six for 20 or $30 million. And as he did those businesses, 3 out of those first 5 needed SEO. And so we did SEO. And then through the nature of doing deals for a long time together, we became friends. And he goes, "Hey, my sixth business, I'm considering venture capital investment. I'm going to start a marketing consulting agency in a specific niche, but they might want to round this up into have a more well-rounded agency. No obligations. Do you want to come listen in case they go, yeah, let's have an SEO division?" I said, sure. And so I went and I learned a lot of things very quickly. One is that I never want to work with venture capital. Like they're all just blood-sucking assholes. Sure, there's probably an exception somewhere, but like they would say things and you could just read between the lines. If you're paying attention, you could read between the lines that they had every intention to screw you, no matter if they said it was a positive or a negative on their end or your end or whatever. And so it was I left that feeling gross. But the valuable thing I learned was buyers, if you ever sell, want two things. One is they want to take the keys and run, which means they need processes. They just want to take it and then largely kick you out at the soonest possibility. And I've since seen that time and time again in clients selling their business. And then two is they want to know where the fire is so they can throw more fuel on it. So where are the sales? And so when I left that, I went, wow, that is a significant multiplier if you have good processes. And so at the time, it was like I had processes, but because I was doing a lot of it, they were just in my head. And then the documentation I'd started to make for my team members, at this time I probably had 10 team members, was largely me just telling them and they'd go do it. And then they do it enough that they remembered, or, a spreadsheet or a Word doc, but I didn't have them centralized. And so at that point, I centralized everything. And so when I started to document everything, I didn't want to get to the end of it and realized I made a half effort and then I'd have to go back through and look for all the gaps. And so if I was going to do it, I was going to do it properly. And so what that meant for me is it took about a year. And I didn't work on it every day, but it was like a year between working 2 to 3 hours every other day or every couple of days while also balancing everything else. And when I got to the end of it, I wanted documentation and SOPs, standard operating procedures that were so efficient that I could more or less just hire somebody, even with little to no experience, as long as they could read and follow directions. It was so detailed that almost anybody could do it. And so I wrote the documentation pretending I knew nothing. And so when I did that, shortly after that, I want to say within 30 days, is where we had the opportunity to bid on our first $10,000 a month single contract. And in that moment, I went, holy crap, like talk about timing, because had I not done that, A, I would not feel comfortable bidding on this. And B, even if I did, which I wouldn't, but theoretically, if I bid on it just because I wanted the money, um, I would burn my reputation because I couldn't deliver on it. And so that was the realization, was like, back to the question is like, what do you need to deliver on that confidently? You have to have a confidence in your processes. And so depending on how big your team is, that might just be you because it's relative to your product, and everybody can define big differently as far as how big the contract is. And then if you have a team, your team is going to be as good or as bad as the documentation and processes that you give them as well.
Phenomenal answer. Again, I didn't see that answer coming from you. And you have, is this documentation process the part of the course that I went through?
You get glimpses of it. Like that whole course is an export of all my processes, which I then put into a presentation format. So that is literally all my processes. And so, since then there's been some modifications and additions and subtractions. But what I did is we currently use ClickUp. And so I had my team go through and go, hey, I'm building out a training program, launch a fake project so that all the documentation gets created in a task form, and then give me all those tasks in a linear form. And so then I just took that, translated it, and converted it into like a presentation format.
Do hashtags work?
I will give two answers to that. The first answer is I am not a social media professional. I do it. It is
Disclaimer.
not my area of expertise, though I do it personally. Um, but from my personal opinions, no. And I'd say that for two reasons. One is every time I use a hashtag, my performance results tank. Um, and two is it's funny you asked this because it was just like 2 days ago I saw it was like one of the co-founders of Instagram or something was like did a podcast and he's like hashtags are dumb, they're dead. But from what I've heard, which I don't know if it's true, um, is the reason why it generally performs worse is because if you make a post, then it without a hashtag, most of that goes to your followers and some minor exposure to non-followers. If you do a hashtag, it splits it 50-50 and it goes 50 to your followers and 50 to the hashtag followers. And so the 50 of your hashtag followers don't know who you are usually. And so therefore there's less read time, watch time, engagement, which kills the algorithm, which kills the reach, which makes sense to me because every time like I never really used hashtags. Um, but a couple years ago I was like, well, every once in a while I'd throw one in there to be like, well, everyone else is doing it. Does this work? And every freaking time it just tanked it. So I gave up on hashtags a long time ago.
Very, very insightful. Two more questions for you, Damon, and I'm going to let you run. How involved are high-level clients like Tony Robbins in their own marketing?
It varies. I've never met Tony specifically, like one-on-one. And his point of contact is awesome. But there's a funny contradiction about there's two different types of quote unquote big clients, right? And so they're either the best clients or the worst. There's very little in between. And so, like an example is Tony Robbins' campaign is great because he has a point of contact who is a marketing manager who is experienced enough to know that the best thing he can do is hire the right agencies and then get out of the way. And so the clients that are the best are the ones that are available as needed and prompt when needed. But other than that, just let you be your professional. But then there's been other clients who I won't say who we haven't been using these guys for a long time, but massive company like multi-billion dollars, and they were absolutely the worst because there were so many layers of politics and red tape that the point of contact they gave us was like, a purchasing manager, like a 20-year-old kid. You think a 20-year-old kid gives any crap about a multi-billion dollar company and like has any expertise or experience in it? One, he's not going to care. Two, he's not the right point of contact to know enough to support the agencies in a way that can drive an ROI to support the initiatives of the marketing campaign. And then even when we would, of course we did our best that we could, but then we'd bring them to the point of needing availability when needed, or approvals on content, or approvals on targets, or approvals on anything, the approvals take 30 seconds. But when we send it to them and they're like, well, I need to ask, my manager, and then the manager needs to go ask the department manager, and then the department manager needs to go ask the division manager, and the division manager needs to go ask legal counsel, and then legal counsel needs to go get approval from the vice president. Like by the time we get an approval, it is either no longer applicable or no longer effective. So it really depends on who, big or small client. The effectiveness of working with them depends on who the point of contact is. The last example I'll give is usually lawyers are really hard to work with, because they tend to be have enough of either an ego or an insecurity that they want to micromanage everything. And some of that's liabilities, which I can understand. But they are really hard to deal with because they are so busy in their other stuff and their head down in the books that they don't give you the time, but you can't move the needle without their approval because they won't let you make any judgment decisions without their approval, but they don't give you the time to do the approvals. However, one of our best clients is a law firm because the point of contact is not the attorney.
Final question for you, Damon, and I really, really appreciate your time and you coming on the Purpose Chasers. What, if any, AI are you utilizing?
That's a good question. I largely don't know because I don't use it enough. I use it surprisingly a lot less than people would probably expect, as a person in my position. Um, for individual usage, I use ChatGPT, but very rarely. I used it last night a little bit, but I probably open ChatGPT once every 2 weeks for 2 minutes. Part of that's not, it's amazing. It has nothing to do with like it not being a valid tool. I just have so much good in front of me already that I'm not looking for other things. And, before this podcast, I was on a call with my COO and I was talking about, I might rewrite my book Outrank from the perspective of how to optimize for AI because AI is largely just another search engine. And so, the fundamentals will still carry over. And so I was asking ChatGPT a couple questions, like, hey, I'm Damon Burton. I wrote Outrank. I'm considering rewriting this. What are some good tools that can help me structure this? Right. And so then I went down a rabbit hole. And then by the end of me exploring options, I was like, gosh, now I got more crap to do. Like I got more crap to do. And so I largely don't use it because one, I already know what direction I'm heading in. And so I'm not looking for new ideas. I already have clarity on how I want to execute those things. So I'm largely not looking for execution insights or shortcut ideas. Um, but the other way I could probably answer that is the team. The team we use, I'm going to butcher this a little bit because I'm fortunate enough now that I'm not in the day to day as much as I used to be. And so my COO does a lot of this stuff. The department leads do a lot of this stuff. So, I paint the vision and then they go execute and find the resources. I do know we use ChatGPT for a lot of our keyword research, and competitive analysis. And then we've also connected that to N8N, which will go run. If you're not familiar with N8N, it's like a tool that can integrate with other tools. So it's like a really crappy comparison would be like some people developers are going to hate me for saying this, but a simplified explanation is like it's Zapier. But you can customize it. And so we've connected N8N to a lot of our research tools where it might go from ChatGPT to Ahrefs to whatever, and it'll cross-reference different things, make a judgment call, give an output that then goes to another sequence of things. So we do use N8N and ChatGPT with some APIs, heavily for research stuff. But beyond that, we use it surprisingly little in other areas, just because I prefer quality control over speed and volume. And there are certainly people that can execute things a lot faster than probably we can in some respects. But I think there's a margin of error or reputation that's up for loss in doing that I would rather take the slightly slower approach to protect the integrity over long term.
If you had one final message for an individual that was, in a similar spot that you were, that you shared at the beginning of this, where they're working on their side hustle and also working a job, how can they spot that? Because you had this little window of opportunity where you were like, and you did the math, you did the breakdown, and then you went all in. For an individual who's on the fence, how could you get them to get their eyes down the field to be able to spot the timing when the universe might drop it on them to go all in on what it is they've been called to do?
That's a good question. I don't know that so much a timing thing. I think timing can obviously be a catalyst or an instigator, but I think it's more of a mindset thing. And a lot of people are going to hate the answer. Really, it boils down to, what do you like to do? What is your passion? And you don't have to know like with clarity what your passion is. Like, I'm really horrible at knowing what my personal individual passions are outside of entrepreneurship and my family. Like, this has been something I've actively been working on for like 2 or 3 years, and like talking to my therapist about, and going like, outside of a husband, a father, an entrepreneur, I don't know who I am. And so, like, I'm not saying you have to have absolute clarity, but what I am saying is, there is so much truth to the idea of following or finding your passion to find financial freedom. And so in entrepreneurship, a lot of times we start the opposite way, myself included to an extent. It's like, we with entrepreneurship, we're like, that's the path to riches. And there's some truth to that as well, because I think what's interesting about this time in our life right now about the economy and the job market is, 10 years ago and for infinity before that, everybody would say 9 to 5s are safe or safer than entrepreneurship. I think it's either 50-50 or now flipped the opposite in the last 5 years, especially the last 2 years. 9 to 5 jobs are no longer safe. They're probably more at risk than they are entrepreneurship. One is just because technological innovations. Two is this whole wave of AI. Three is a lack of loyalty on the corporate side. Like, corporations are built for profit maximization, right or wrong. That's the reality of it. And so if you are a 9 to 5, or you are a line item. And so there is no longer loyalty from a corporation down to an employee. And so you could lose your job literally at any day. So would you rather take the risk of a 9 to 5 that you have no control over, or take the risk of entrepreneurship that you have some control over? Right. And so I'm not saying entrepreneurship is for everybody. It's not fit for everybody. It's stressful. But the other beautiful side about entrepreneurship that you don't learn until you either talk to somebody, mentor, or go through it yourself, is it is probably the best thing you can do for self-development, because you find your boundaries, you find your strengths, you find your weaknesses, you find out how to be a better person, and you find out how to be a better person for yourself, you find out how to be a better person for your spouse, you find out how to be a better person for your kids, because at the end of the day, most of us probably pursue financial freedom for our family. And so if you have the right mindset, not only do you pursue that, but you also keep into consideration, how do I do that while also balancing a happy marriage? And how do I do that while still being present as a father? And you can really only find those edges if you're forced to do it. You can talk about it, you can think about it all you want, and it's a whole other level when you are crammed in a hole and you have no way out other than to go, how do I provide and put food on the table while also showing up with a smile? So I think at the end of the day, for your question, it's like, you have to decide what matters to you. You have to decide if it's worth it. Time is probably not the biggest factor, though it's one of the ones we weigh the most and upfront. But at the end of the day, whether it takes you 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, if it takes you a whole lifetime, if you finally hit it over whatever time horizon and you are financially free and your family is happy, was it worth it? And the answer is probably yes. So figure out what your boundaries are, what you're willing to sacrifice, and then put in the time.
Final question for me. I wasn't going to ask this, but I'm gonna. Do you ever regret putting your beard in your logo? Like, do you ever want to get clean shaven?
I don't regret putting in the logo, no, but sometimes I think about shaving, and I don't sweat about it. Like, if I shave, I've come to like the beard. If I were to shave, it would largely just be out of curiosity, and then I grow it back. But the beard's a funny thing because it was kind of an accident. So what had happened was, I used to grow the beard but not the mustache. And just something looked off. Like, I just kind of looked like I was Amish or something, and it just didn't look legit. And like, nothing wrong with being Amish. Like, it just didn't look right on me. And then I don't know if it was COVID or what, but it was around that time frame. I remember getting on like a plane or a shuttle to the plane. and like somebody was like, "Your beard's looking good," and I was like, "What?" Like that comment came out of nowhere. And then like a week later, I got another. I got like three compliments within like a week, and I'm like, "Where is this coming from?" And so after like the second or third one, I was like looking in the mirror. I'm like, "What is different?" And I realized just through laziness that I grew the mustache. And I was like, "Oh, that was the missing piece." And so then I was like, I'll grow it out for a while and see where this goes. And it just kind of grew on me. And then how it became the logo is I had those like really cliche, D and a B back to back, where you just kind of figure out how to put two letters together. And I never liked it. And then when I started doing the beard, it's like, I wonder if there's a way. I kept getting, feedback on Facebook posts and things like that. And so the comments on the beard kept going. I'm like, I wonder if I can integrate this. And so it really became part of the logo because I wanted a logo that actually represented what it was saying, which was my name. And so I didn't want to just do like some abstract art or back-to-back letters. And I had the idea of the face of the top A and the bottom U, and I sent it to my design team. I sent a rough draft, and I said, "See if you can make this happen." One designer came back with the right framework, and the other designer came back with the right face and beard. And I said, "Merge the two," and there it became a thing.
Damon, thank you so much for your time and thank you for, following your gut of posting online because you've really fed life into me, man. And I'm really appreciative to have leadership in marketing such as yourself and in business to, individuals that really inspire me from a high level of high integrity. I'm really grateful for what you're doing online and Bud's introduction to you.
Thanks, dude. Yeah, that means a lot. I appreciate, that's like I said, the personal reward is why I stick to it. So I appreciate that.
Thanks for tuning in to the Purpose Chasers podcast. If today's episode hit home, don't just listen, engage. Follow me on Spotify, drop a review, and join the conversation over on YouTube at The Purpose Chasers or on Instagram at Organic Nerdword. This is more than a podcast. It's a movement. And if you're here, you're already part of it. Remember, no amount of darkness can keep someone who's been called. So keep chasing, keep building, and keep standing in your purpose. I'm Mark Crandall, signing off until next time. Let's get it.